turn that over to
you. We are all have been speaking today about the physical way of the agreement, how the borders should look like, how many settlers will have to be evacuated. But we didn't speak about the real challenge, and the real challenge is the mental one. It's not the physical one. And to take the decision to bring back to Israel, and the terminology of mine is much different than the terminology of the settlers, of course, that they will say that this is the way to exclude them and to take them out of their houses. This process will be maybe the biggest challenge in the history of Israel regarding the Israeli society. In Gaza we saw the trailer for that. Gaza is not a holy place, it's a small place. A huge majority of Israelis didn't want to be there, so it was easier. And also the settlers understood that if they are not making a real struggle, so maybe it will be smoothly eventually and it will be forgotten even. So it's going to be a real big challenge for the Israeli society. And the settlers will use any tools that they have in order to create support and to stop the process. And there are also settlers that will think that to leave Hebron, and in my point of view, we are not leaving Hebron. We are not going to have a political sovereignty over Hebron, but the Jewish people are not leaving Hebron. They can still come there. Maybe some of them will be able to live there. But the sovereignty, the political identity, what is a sovereignty? It's a political idea. It's not a religious one. This will be end in the green line. But to explain it to the settlers and to explain it to the Israelis and taking all the things that will happen, it will be a huge challenge and much more difficult than the Gaza Strip. But if you look at the numbers and the maps, physical, you can do it. It's a challenge, but it's not something that is impossible. Just to conclude by saying the way to speak with the Israelis, like I think any other human being, is to give the carrots and the sticks. You have to tell the Israelis that if you will not do it, you will be totally isolated. It's going to be South Africa, number 2. There is not a way to prevent or to avoid the two-state solution. Eventually you have to do it, and this is the stick. And the carrots is what Danny mentioned about the Arab embassies in the holy place, in the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, and many things that we will get from this agreement. But for sure, it's something that deserves not one panel, but maybe a whole convention.
Okay, Danny.
I wouldn't use the word pressure, I'd use the word engagement. There's one statement here that I take a bit of an exception to. We said the greatest obstacle to peace on the Israeli side are the settlements. I think there's a greater obstacle. There are the cafes in Tel Aviv and the malls in Rishon LeZion. We Israelis are sipping cappuccino on the edge of a volcano. And those of you who love Israel are not doing us a favor by not engaging on that. Most Israelis understand that perpetuating occupation is an existential threat to the Zionist enterprise. We need to be reminded of that. Friends don't let friends go drunk.
For our last round, we're going to try the Israeli method. We're going to ask 3 different questions all together and then let our panelists answer it. This young woman with her hand raised has been trying to ask, well, why don't we stop, Dan? Stop right there. And let's do this one question right here in front of you. Yes.
I just
K Street board member.
Just wanted to ask about what's happening with E1 and, you know, if Malaland, I mean, is part of Israel, you know, how would that? I saw the map where there was a road in one of the configurations. If you could just talk about that.
Okay, E1 and
Hi, so I know we're talking about settlements specifically, but while we're talking about the viability of a two-state solution, I'm curious as to your thoughts of the disconnect between Gaza and the West Bank, one in terms of the geographical logistics and how that would be alleviated, but also in terms of the disparation between leadership between those two sides.
Great. And while Dan is coming up here for the last question, I want to thank everybody for asking questions as opposed to making statements. I appreciate it, and it's helped more people get their questions in. Yes?
This was going to be directed to Dan Seidman. It's related to that one, actually. I'm familiar with the monograph, The Arc, about how to connect the two disparate parts, Gaza and West Bank, and I just wonder what your thoughts are about the viability of many of its ideas, given the current situation.
Great. So, who wants to start? Either the first or second question.
Okay. Very briefly about E1. E1 is the major settlement between Ma'ale Adumim and East Jerusalem that would so fragment the West Bank and so cut it off from its environs, East Jerusalem from its environs in the West Bank. I call it the fatal heart attack of the two-state solution. So much so that consecutive American presidents have told every Israeli prime minister since Clinton, you're not going to do E1, and each Israeli prime minister has said, yes, sir, until Netanyahu. Last November, in the wake of the UN resolution granting non-member status to the Palestinians, Bibi took E1 out of mothballs and began to pursue it. Under current circumstances, E1 will not be built because every regional governor in Sri Lanka knows what E1 it means that the ceiling will fall in on Israel. Netanyahu will not initiate E1, but he will use E1 as a response. Should the Kerry initiative fail and the settlement floodgates will open, it is clear that the Palestinians will take the legality of the settlement enterprise to international fora, whether in the United Nations or to the International Criminal Court of Justice, at which point E1 will be pursued. On that day of December 31st, when I stood with the senior military officer, one of his staff persons said, oh, come on, Netanyahu will not build E1. And my interlocutor, my friend, senior military person with a very sly smile said, oh, yes, he will. It's not over yet.
Does everybody know E1 is the road and some part of a swath of land connecting Ma'ale Adumim with Jerusalem? Next, Yariv.
The question regarding Gaza and the West Bank, it's a challenge for the Palestinians. They will have to unite. The agreement should be between us and the Palestinians. And when I spoke about Hebron that will have to be evacuated, it's a huge challenge. And this is our challenge to bring back the settlers. The Palestinians will have their own challenge to create one state and not to have the two states and to deal with Hamas and all the inside politics. But for sure this is their challenge. Regarding the viability of that, we are talking about the safe passage that will come down. Maybe we would like to speak about it. The safe passage between Gaza and the West Bank. And it's something that has been tried in the past and it was a success until the second Intifada. And by the way, this is another tool to swap territories, but now maybe we should.
Okay, very briefly. At least in the safe passage was a term used in Oslo. There were 3 different routes that envisioned or relatively free Palestinian movement in Gaza and the West Bank. And it actually was implemented for a little while with mixed results. It was cut off, obviously, ultimately with the second Intifada. In the context of permanent status, we're talking about more than just safe passage. It's going to be a corridor. It's going to be a new physical link between the West Bank and Gaza. A highway for sure, probably also a railway and some infrastructure running along it. The X group, AIX group, you can find the reports online, have delineated 2 possible routes that are superimposed on the map here. And that's envisioning. It'll be under permanent, probably under Israeli sovereignty, but under permanent, open and unmonitored Palestinian administration. Open 24/7 as they will. It'll probably be a sunken road, which makes most sense as far as the physical ability to construct it.
So I'm going to use the ARC question to sort of conclude my remarks. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the ARC was a project of the RAND Corporation, I think it's almost 10 years ago. And it is, I think, a good example of the creative thinking, the tremendous amount of energy and creative thinking that has gone into finding ways to have a two-state solution, to have a viable Palestinian state. It is full of great ideas. To some extent, and in this moment in time, it is sort of Sin City builds Palestine, because its starting point is that there are no political barriers to having really good solutions. So right now it's not implementable, but it has tremendously innovative ideas for how you build a Palestinian transportational infrastructure to support a new economy, how you build links across borders. It's amazing stuff. This goes back again to that pragmatic reality check. The amount of time and energy that has been spent over the past 20, 30 years coming up with solutions to the technical issues related to the two-state solution would fill libraries. And it is very good work. Much of it we have been involved in. I worked with Danny Seidman and other people on something called the Jerusalem Old City Initiative, which went into stunningly detailed solutions for things like sewage in the Old City. How do you manage a two-state solution when you have shared sewage systems? This work has been done. It's not fantasy. And this is where we get back to the question of what is the barrier to the two-state solution? Is it that settlements have gone so far there's a tipping point? No. Is it because there are so many settlers and we can't evacuate them? Well, Israel is a democracy with one of the most powerful armies in the world. If it can't evacuate settlers, that is the problem, really, not anything else. I don't think that is the problem. The problem is the political will. If there is the political will, there are brilliant ideas. They are fully fleshed out on refugees, on Jerusalem, on Hebron, on water, on security, on borders. That work has been done. It is ready to go. What we need to do is build the political will, the momentum, to get to the point of the hard decisions.
Thank you, Laura. I want to respond to something that was said and leave it with us. Which is in the context of thanking J Street, thanking all of you, certainly thanking our panelists. But a lot of us on the left, and a lot of organizations that work on this issue have, in order to show how important this process is right now, have been saying that it's now or never. If it doesn't happen now, the window will be closed. And I want us to be very careful about saying that, because those of you in this room, and we're buying into the hope thing, we realize that, this is cautiously optimistic, but we're excited, we're hopeful, but the reality is it may not happen now, and it won't be over. It'll be just that much harder. But every one of us in this room and every one of us at this conference, even if it doesn't happen this time, is going to keep working on this because it's critical, not just for the survival of Israel, it's in the U.S. strategic interest, it's in the Palestinian interest, and it's extremely important that we keep going until there are two states for two peoples. I'm going to turn this back over to Jim. I would urge you to go to peacenow.org and sign up for Newsnotch and sign up for our weekly update. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your great questions.
Conclude, obviously I want to thank Deborah for her fine moderating work, and the panelists for their great response to all of you, and to you, to your response to them, with your thoughtful questions, and just a few thoughts, and one housekeeping thing. You all know the concurrent session is going on. It started at 9:50, so you can consult your focus guide. Just a few concluding thoughts. Take away from it.
Thank you.
We know that J Street is our political aggressor in the United States, and thank God it showed up. Americans for Peace Now strives to deliver the message of the two-state solution to the American public and to our government. And it also supports our sister organization, Shalom Achshava in Israel. What you should take away from here, from this session as American Jews, you have an address in Israel. Don't let anybody intimidate you because you don't live in Israel. Remind them that you've got your cousins Yarid, you've got your cousin Danny, you've got your cousin Dan, right here. Take that away and don't let anybody intimidate you. Thank you.